Hey, shalom, shalom from your Dutch Uncle John, here to tell you about Esther, a little book in the Old Testament. I think there's 10 chapters. So let's start. The Old Testament, which we Christians call the Old Testament, is not called the Old Testament by the Jews because there is no New Testament for the Jews, right? They call the Old Testament the Tanakh. And the way they get the word Tanakh, the first 5 books of the Bible are the Torah, so there's your T. And then you have the Nevi'im. Nevi is the Hebrew word for prophet, and if you pluralize it, Nevi'im, the prophets. Okay, and there are 7 major prophets and 12 minor prophets, and they're just determined a major or minor by the size of the book. And then you have the Ketuvim, which is the K sound, and the Ketuvim is the writings, okay? And if you put those 3 together, the Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, T and K, Tanakh. Got it? Okay. Well, Esther is in the Ketuvim. It's part of the writings, and there are 5 books in the Ketuvim that they call the Megillot, okay? A Megillah is a scroll, okay? That's the Hebrew word. And so the scroll of Esther, okay, that's what we're going to be studying today, or the Megillah of Esther. Got it? In fact, Esther is the most famous of the Megillahs, all right, or the Megillot. It's a feminine word, so it's pluralized with O-T on the end. In fact, if they just say the Megillah is Esther. Okay? So it's the scroll. So we're going to talk about the Megillah today. And the Megillah is actually referenced in the Torah. If you go back to Deuteronomy 31:18, it says, but I will surely hide my face in that day because of all the evil which they will do, for they will turn to other gods. All right, so where is Esther hidden in that verse? Well, the word seter is to hide, okay, hide something. And here in this verse, it says, I will surely hide my face in that day. And remember, in Hebrew, if you want to overemphasize something, I will surely, absolutely do something, you repeat the word twice. And here, you can see in Deuteronomy, he has haseter Esther. So it's being repeated twice. I'm not going to just hide, I will surely hide my face. And that word seter, Esther, is hide, okay? So when we come to the book of Esther, the book of Esther means something hidden, okay? And you'll notice when we began here, the first slide had Esther's name, and it was very faint, okay, hard to see, because there's a lot of stuff hidden in Esther. And by the way, remember Proverbs 25:2. It says, it is the glory of Elohim to conceal a matter, but it's the glory of kings to search out a matter. So if God has something hidden in the book of Esther, it's our job to find it. All right. So, Esther, she's going to be kind of the star of this book. Her actual given name, her Hebrew given name is Hadassah. Okay? And Hadassah in Hebrew means myrtle, as in the plant or tree, the myrtle tree. Okay? If I'd have been thinking, I would have worn my Myrtle Beach shirt today, but I didn't pack it, so we're not wearing Myrtle Beach. But we are wearing San Antonio, and San Antonio, we have a little star here, And why is that important? Because Esther, when she was taken, she was part of the Jews who they were taken to Babylon, and then from Babylon they were taken to Persia. And her Persian name, they gave her a Persian name, which was Esther. And Esther means star in Persian. Okay? Got it? So there's something hidden right there. Her name is hidden. And that word Esther in Persian means star. All right? And Esther has the unique quality or whatever that it does not mention God. It's one of the few books, I think maybe Song of Solomon might be the other one. So let's go ahead and begin in chapter 1. Okay, so now it took place in the day of Ahasuerus, who, by the way, is also known as Xerxes. Okay, so sometimes if I say Ahasuerus, which is difficult to say, I might just say Xerxes, same guy, he's the king of Persia at the time. Now it took place in the day of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Cush over 127 provinces. You can see here the map of how big the Persian Empire was at his time. He went from India, well there's India on the far right, all the way to Cush. Cush, by the way, is the area below Egypt. Egypt is known as Mitzrayim in Hebrew, and below that is Cush. So this would be kind of Sudan, Ethiopia area. So he had a very big empire, 127 provinces. And as I mentioned earlier, God is not mentioned in this book, but you are going to find him hidden, because Esther means something hidden, right? And Esther also has a significance of, it was the only biblical book not to have been found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's no portion of Esther in that. Okay? Nor is Esther alluded to or quoted or mentioned anywhere in the New Testament. There are no prayers in Esther. There's no specific commandments or laws mentioned. And none of the characters are like overly moral or godly in the book of Esther. Interesting how that's all going to tie together. Verse 2. In those days, as King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne, which was at the citadel in Susa. Susa, where have we heard that before? Remember in the book of Daniel, it talks about Susa. Daniel 8:2. I looked in the vision, and while I was looking, I was in the citadel of Susa, which is in the province of Elam. And I looked in the vision, and I myself was beside the Ulai Canal. Elam, by the way, is the ancient name for Persia, which is modern-day Iran. Verse 3. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his princes and attendants, the army officers of Persia and Media, the nobles of the princes of his provinces, being in his presence. Okay, in this verse, if you look at it in the Hebrew, here's our first hidden message. He has the word Messiah, Moshiach, hidden every 8 letters apart. I have them here in red. There's a mem, 8 letters later, shin, then a yud, then a chet. Remember, it's Mashiach. It ends in a chet. So Messiah is hidden every 8 letters apart. That's interesting that it would be 8 because 8 is the number of the Messiah. Yeshua, Jesus, Iousis in Greek, adds up to 888. So there's a little tie in there. Okay, Jesus is 888. Verse 4. And he displayed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor of his great majesty for many days, 180 days. When these days were completed, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days for all the people who were present at the citadel in Susa, from the greatest to the least, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. Verse 6, There were hangings of fine white and violet linen, held by cords of fine purple linen on silver rings and marble columns, and couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. I don't know what porphyry is. But what is interesting is he just had a banquet for 180 days. That's a long banquet. And then in verse 5, when these days were completed, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days. So we've got 2 banquets. Like the 180-day banquet wasn't long enough. We're going to have another 7-day banquet on top of that. Verse 7, drinks were served in golden vessels of various kinds, and the royal wine was plentiful, according to the king's bounty. The drinking was done according to the law. There was no compulsion, for so the king had given orders to each official of his household that he should do according to the desires of each person. Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the palace which belonged to King Ahasuerus. Okay, notice there's a third banquet going on. Queen Vashti is having her own little banquet over here. Okay, keep that in mind. And I like the idea here. It says the drinking was done according to the law. There was no compulsion. Drink a little if you want, drink a lot if you want, don't drink at all if you want. It's up to you. That's very nice. And that's actually going to tie in with, God, He gives us bountiful amounts. And there's no compulsion that we have to memorize the entire Bible. No, you can read a little, you can read a lot. You're free to not read it at all. It's up to you, okay? So there might be a parallel here between, if we're playing typology, you have the king may represent God in this picture, or in this book. Verse 10, on the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Memuman, Bigtha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagatha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown in order to display her beauty to the people and the princes, for she was beautiful. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. Then the king became very angry, and his wrath burned within him. Verse 13, then the king said to the wise men who understood the times, for it was the custom of the king so to speak before all who knew law and justice, and were close to him, Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Merez, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who had access to the king's presence and sat in the first place in the kingdom. According to law, what is to be done with Queen Vashti, because she did not obey the king's command delivered by the eunuchs? Okay, we got to tear this apart for a minute here. So the king's having this party. He invites Queen Vashti to show off her beauty. She refuses to come to the party. And now some punishment has to be given to her. So the king said to the wise men who understood the times, what should be done to Queen Vashti? These wise men who understood the times, you know who they are? Remember whenever Jesus was born, you can go to Matthew 2. Okay, let's read that. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. These Magi means the wise men. And they came from the east. Remember, Daniel was taken captive to Babylon. And then Babylon was conquered. That was Nebuchadnezzar took them, right? Took the Jews. And then Persia invaded Babylon and took the Jews to Persia. So now you have all these Jews there, including Daniel. And Daniel makes prophecies about the Magi. Okay, Daniel was one of the Magi. He was one of the wise men. They gave him the choice food, and he came up with all kind of wise things. In fact, in Daniel, is it 9? He actually prophesies when to the day the Messiah will arrive. And this is all recorded in the records of Media and Persia. So, because Daniel had prophesied when the Messiah will arrive, Daniel later dies, and hundreds of years go by, and those wise men who are in the court there in Persia, they're reading Daniel's prophecy, and they're saying, hey, look, this Messiah should be arriving soon. Let's go to Jerusalem and look for him. That's why Magi showed up at Jesus' birth, because of Daniel's prophecy. And those wise men are the ones referred to here in Esther 1:13. The king said to the Magi who understood the times. Got it? Very nice. It all ties in. Verse 16. In the presence of the king and the princes, Memucan said, Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but also all the princes and all the people who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, causing them to look with contempt on their husbands by saying, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought into his presence, but she did not come. Verse 18, this day the ladies of Persia and Media, who have heard of the queen's conduct, will speak in the same way to all the king's princes, and there will be plenty of contempt and anger. If it pleases the king, let a royal decree go out from him, and let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it will not be altered, that Vashti shall come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. So we're going to replace Vashti with a new queen, and she will not be able to come again to the king's presence. Wow. So again, let's play the typology. Who would Vashti be? Well, you know, if the king represents God, and God summons his bride, and she doesn't come, well, that's kind of reminiscent of God promised the Jews that a Messiah will come. And the Messiah came, and the Jews rejected him. They did not accept. So I could kind of see in typology that Vashti represents the Jews in this story. It's all prophetic because this happened before the Messiah showed up. Okay, so Vashti's going to have her queenness taken from her, which is not uncommon in the Old Testament. 1 Samuel 15:28. So Samuel said to Saul, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and has given it to a neighbor of yours who is better than you. So it's not unheard of to have your kingship or queenship taken from you. By the way, this whole beginning part of the book of Esther on having a previous queen, Vashti, who refuses to come and then gets dethroned, actually that really has no point in the story of Esther, which is about to start. Esther's going to be introduced soon. Because you could have just had the king, a single king, looking for a queen. But there was a reason that he had to put this part at the beginning of Vashti not showing up and being banned. So there's got to be some kind of a tie-in as to why that even occurred, because otherwise it's not germane to the story. Okay. Esther 1:20. When the king's edict, which he will make, is heard throughout all his kingdom, great as it is, Then all women will give honor to their husbands, great and small. Now, I told you at the beginning that God is not mentioned in the book of Esther, but he is hidden there. And here is a verse where we have him hidden in Esther 1:20. I have it here in Hebrew. Notice that on the second line, you have 4 words in a row that begin, one of them, the first one there begins with a hey, then a vav, then a hey, then a yod, which is Yahweh, if you read them backwards, right? Yud, hey, vav, hey. So he has his name, God has his name, Yahweh, hidden, appearing backwards, and then they begin 4 consecutive words. Just keep that in mind. We'll see it more in the future here. Okay, verse 21. This word pleased the king and the princes, and the king did as Memucan proposed. So he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province according to its script, and to every people according to their language, that every man should be master in his own house, and the one who speaks in the language of his own people. All right. Chapter 2. Verse 1, after these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Wow, that's interesting, because in chapter 1, he is banished or forgot. Queen Vashti, she's history, no more. Which, that's kind of what God did with the Jews, right? He had them scattered all over the world when they rejected their Messiah. But God remembers. Okay, and I've told you this before, the Hebrew word zakar, like in Zechariah, zakar means remember, as in God remembers the Jews. He made a promise to Abraham which he cannot come back, he can't back out of. So when we read the book of Revelation, Hit Galut, Apocalypsis, whatever language you want to call it, the book of Revelation is known as the time of Jacob's trouble. Jacob, remember, got his name changed to Israel. So Israel is going to be remembered by God. She's not completely gone. And here, in parallel, we see that the king remembered Vashti. So another nice tie-in that God, although he dismissed the Jews, he remembered them, and he's going to finish the story with Abraham having remembered the Jews. They're not been replaced by any other church, right? The Jews are the chosen people. And if you are in a church that you think all of a sudden you are the new chosen people, ooh, you're in the wrong church, my friend. Okay? The Jews are the chosen people. God bless the Jews. I'll drink to that. Today we've got pomegranate, lubimi. Love it. Okay. Verse 2. Then the king's attendants who served him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king. Let the king appoint overseers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather every beautiful young virgin to the citadel of Susa, to the harem, into the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women, and let their cosmetics be given to them. Then let the young lady who pleases the king be queen in place of Vashti. And the matter pleased the king, and he did accordingly. Now there was at the citadel in Susa a Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Yair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been taken into exile from Jerusalem with the captives who had been exiled, with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had exiled. Okay, we got a lot to tear apart here. So we got this Jewish man named Mordecai. He was taken by Babylon, and now he's been taken by the Persians. Okay, he's Jewish. He's a Benjamite, descendant of Benjamin. Saul, if you remember, was a Benjamite. Okay, in the New Testament, Paul was a Benjamite. All right. And you notice I have a little asterisk in front of verse 5. You know, the Jews read this story of Esther every year on the holiday of Purim, which we will explain in a bit. And they read it twice. They read it the night before and they read it the day of. And they stand when they read it. Or when the rabbi is reading it, okay? But there are 4 verses in Esther that when they show up, everybody in the congregation reads together. And verse 5 is one of those. And you will see 3 more throughout this talk where everyone reads these verses. And this one was, now there was in the citadel in Susa a Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Yair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. We all read that one together. And that's going to be important because when you see today's bonus, there's going to be a bonus. That will come into play. Verse 6. We've already read verse 6, but I wanted to point out to you here, I told you that God's name was not mentioned, but it is kind of hidden again here in verse 6. Look in the 3rd line with Jeconiah, king of Judah. Jecon means to establish, and then Yah at the end. Yah is short for Yahweh. So he is mentioned here in Jeconiah. There's Yah, Yahweh. Okay, another little hidden place. Okay, verse 7, we're talking about Mordecai. Mordecai, he was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had no father or mother. Now the young lady was beautiful of form and face, and when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So here's the first mention of Esther, and I told you before, her name in Hebrew was Hadassah, which means myrtle, but she has a Persian name, Esther, which means star. All right. And a lot of times, you'll hear preachers and teachers talk about Mordecai was Esther's uncle. But he's not the uncle. He's a cousin. Look what it says. Mordecai, was bringing up Esther, his uncle's daughter. Well, to be an uncle's daughter, uncle was going to be his mother's brother or his father's brother's child. That's who Esther would be, which makes them cousins. He just happens to be much older than Esther, but he's not an uncle, he's a cousin. So says the book. And you're going to see Mordecai is actually the hero of this story. I think more so than Esther. You'll see Mordecai's name is mentioned 58 times in this whole story. Esther's name is only mentioned 53 times. Okay? And you'll see Mordecai has the fortitude. He's the wise, unbending guy. Esther is actually a little bit frightened at times to do what she happens to have to do. Okay? She's going to do it, and she ends up being the heroine of the story. But I think Mordecai is even higher up on the faith in God scenario here. Okay, Esther 2:8. So it came about when the command and decree of the king was heard, and many young ladies were gathered to the citadel of Susa into the custody of Haggai, that Esther was taken to the king's palace into the custody of Haggai, who was in charge of the women. This guy Haggai, this eunuch who's going to prepare the women for the king to then choose his new queen. Let me remind you of the Hebrew alphabet. We've shown you before, if you've watched my alphabet series, Aleph is God, the Father. This is God's letter, Aleph. Bet represents Ben or Bar, the Son of God. Okay? And Gimel is the third. Gimel, its ancient picture is a camel. And Gimel represents the Holy Spirit. What? How does a camel represent the Holy Spirit? Well, I can't go into that whole talk, but if you watch the Akedah Part 2, it explains it very nicely. Okay? John the Baptist was a type of Holy Spirit, and he was always wearing camel hair and a leather belt. So whenever you see camels in the Bible, camels represent Holy Spirit. And the letter Gimel represents Holy Spirit. It only makes sense. If God's going to make an alphabet, and he's a 3-in-1 complex unity God, Father, Son, Spirit, the first 3 letters, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Father, Son, Spirit. It's logical. And God is, if anything, logical. So Gimel represents Holy Spirit. Now let's look at this guy who's this eunuch who's going to help the women prepare for their meeting of the king. His name was Haggai, and there's a Gimel in the middle. And what's on either side of that Gimel? There's a Yud at the end, and there's a Hey at the beginning, and Yud Hey is Yah. So Haggai's name, it actually is the Spirit of Yah. I can kind of see that in here. And you know what? What prepares us for our meeting with God whenever we pass on or are raptured, right? It's the Holy Spirit who instructs us and comforts us and helps us and prepares us for our meeting with God Almighty, right? Beautiful picture hidden in this book. Verse 9 of chapter 2, now the young lady pleased him and found favor with him. So he quickly provided her with cosmetics and food, gave her 7 choice maids from the king's palace, and transferred her and her maids to the best place in the harem. Esther did not make known her people or her kindred, for Mordecai had instructed her that she should not make them known. Every day Mordecai walked back and forth in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and how she fared. So Mordecai told Esther, listen, don't tell them you're a Jew. Okay, so that's what happened here. She hasn't told them. Verse 12. Now when the turn of each young lady came to go into King Ahasuerus, after the end of her 12 months under the regulations for the women, for the days of their beautification were completed as follows: 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with spices and the cosmetics for women. The young lady would go into the king in this way. Anything that she desired was given her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. So after a year of preparation, each woman is going to go in before the king, and they can take whatever they want with them. In the evening, she would go in, and in the morning, she would return to the second harem, to the custody of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the concubines. She would not again go into the king unless the king delighted in her and she was summoned by name. Now when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter, came to go into the king, she did not request anything except what Haggai, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the women, advised. And Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. That's a beautiful picture. I can see all these other women it's their day to go in and I need jewelry, and I need my hair, and I need the robe of gold, and they're asking for everything. No, Esther asked for nothing except for what Haggai suggested. And that's the same thing whenever we approach God. I don't need any other kind of stuff. I just need what the Holy Spirit says to take. That's a nice parallel that a lot of times we miss when we're reading this story. And if you've noticed, this is the 5th time that Esther's name is mentioned. I've had them all highlighted as we went through. There was the first mention, second, third. I put a little subscript or superscript, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Notice in verse 15, there's the 5th mention of Esther. Okay? And it says, and Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. So the verse that has the 5th mention of Esther's name, she finds favor in the eyes of all who saw her. Remember, 5 is the letter Hey. Hey is behold, a revelation, an open window, some blessing, something big is coming. Okay? And the 5th mention of someone's name, they find favor, they find grace. This 5, hey, favor, grace, revelation, behold. We see it back in Genesis 6:8 and Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. That's the 5th mention of Noah's name. Ruth 2:2, and Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, please let me go in the field and glean among the ears of grain after one in whose sight I may find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter. That's the 5th mention of Ruth. 1 Samuel 16:22, Saul said to Jesse, saying, let David now stand before me, for he has found favor in my sight. That's the 5th mention of David's name. And we've just shown you that the 5th mention of Esther's name, that verse has Esther finding favor. And there happens to be 5 of these people whose 5th mention of their name shows them finding favor. The last one is Daniel 1:9, and God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. So there are the 5 people whose 5th mention of their name invokes favor. By the way, if you're going to check me on that one from Daniel, don't forget to count one of his names prior to that was Belshazzar. And that's a name of Daniel, so you got to count that one too. Don't be writing to me and saying, we only count 4 Daniels before the finds favor. Okay, 2:16. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus to his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the women, and she found favor and kindness with him, more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his princes and his servants. He also made a holiday for the provinces and gave gifts according to the king's bounty. Notice we got another banquet here. How many banquets have we had? We had the king's 180-day banquet, then there was a 7-day banquet, and then the queen had a banquet. Queen Vashti had a banquet for the women, and now we've got Esther's banquet when she gets crowned. Keep that in mind. There's going to be a lot of eating in this story. Okay? Esther 2:19, when the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Esther had not yet made known her kindred or her people, even as Mordecai had commanded her. For Esther did what Mordecai told her, as she had done when under his care. So she still has not revealed that she was Jewish. 21. In those days, while Mordecai was sitting in the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, 2 of the king's officials from those who guarded the door, became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. But the plot became known to Mordecai, and he told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. Now when the plot was investigated and found to be so, they were both hanged on a gallows. And it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the king's presence. So Mordecai overhears a plot to kill the king. He tells Esther. Esther tells the king. The plot is found out, and the 2 guys who were planning to kill the king are killed. Chapter 3. Verse 1. After these events, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and established his authority over all the princes who were with him. Let me just pause right here and explain. Haman is going to be the bad guy in this story. And the Jews, they blot out his name. They don't want to hear it ever. So I've put lines through Haman's name here. So we're blotting it out because he is a bad guy. Okay. In fact, every year when the Jews read this Megillah, a lot of times the kids will dress up as the different characters. And when Esther comes on stage, everybody yells and applauds. And whenever Mordecai, he's the hero, everybody cheers him for Mordecai. But whenever Haman's name is mentioned, boo, boo, they drown it out with yells and screams so as not to even hear his name. Okay? So we have it blacked out, and it will be like that throughout this story, if you're wondering why it's like that. Verse 2, all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, why are you transgressing the king's command? Why aren't you bowing down when Haman comes past? Verse 4, now it was when they had spoken daily to him, and he would not listen to them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's reason would stand, for he had told them he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage to him, Haman was filled with rage. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him who the people of Mordecai were. Therefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. Verse 7, in the first month, which is the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, Pur, that is the lot, was cast before Haman from day to day and from month to month until the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. Pur, P-U-R, is the Hebrew word for a lot, or picture a die. Okay, you're going to cast dice. All right, and Pur is one die. If you pluralize it, yud mem, Purim. Those are dice, more than one, okay? And I don't know if they're using dice or whatever. They're using something to throw and to cast down and predict a day or something in the future, okay? And this name, Purim, ends up becoming a Jewish holiday that celebrates the whole Esther story. So Purim just means lots or dice. Lots, not like lots and lots, many, but you're casting lots. Okay, casting dice. Verse 8, then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of all other people, and they do not observe the king's laws, so it is not in the king's interest to let them remain. If it is pleasing to the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who carry on the king's business, to put into the king's treasuries. Verse 10, then the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, the silver is yours, and the people also, to do with them as you please. Okay, so Haman, it's been ordered that everybody bow down to Haman, right? He's kind of number 2 in Persia. The king made him number 2, and everybody has to bow down to him. Mordecai is a Jew. He's not going to bow down to anybody. Some people notice that he's not bowing to Haman, and they tell Haman, and Haman notices, and Haman's so upset that this man won't bow down to him that he's going not only to destroy Haman, he wants to destroy every Jew in the king's empire. And he cast dice to pick a day when he will do the destroying. And he has to get permission from the king to do this, so he goes to the king and says, hey, you got these people and their laws are different than ours and yours, and they're just not a good asset for you to have in your kingdom. Let me give you 10,000 pieces of silver to destroy them. And the king said, keep your money, do what you want, destroy them. He doesn't call them Jews. He doesn't know that they're Jews. The king doesn't. Nor does he know that Esther is a Jew. But if an edict goes out, kill all the Jews, the king's command is the king's command, and Esther was one of them. Okay? In this verse, by the way, verse 11, look at it in the Hebrew. In this verse, if you count every 6 letters apart, and we're going to start with the second word, the first letter is a hey, and you jump ahead 6 letters, you get a mem, 6 letters again, you get a noon. That spells Haman, every 6 letters. That's interesting because Haman is a type of Antichrist, okay, who's destroy the Jews, destroy the Jews. And here it's 6 letters apart, Haman. And if you do another 6 letters, you get a Vav. Vav, if you remember, represents a nail. Nails connect things. Vav is the word and. Okay, so you have Haman and let's continue 6 more. I get a Shin. 6 more, I get a Tet. 6 more, I get another Noon. That spells Satan. Wow. Go 6 more, and you get a Resh, and 6 more is a Vav, and 6 more is a Chet. And the whole sentence says, Haman and Satan stink. Every 6 letters apart in Esther 3:11. Very, very funny, God. Love it. Verse 12. Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and it was written just as Haman commanded to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, and to the princes of each people. Each province according to its script, each people according to its language, being written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet ring. Haman gets permission then, right, to destroy these people. He sends out an edict to all the 127 provinces. It's sealed with his signet ring because the king gave him the ring, right? He can put whatever he wants now. To kill all the Jews on this given date in the future, which was established by him casting Purim, right? Dice. Verse 13. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to seize their possessions as plunder. So it was established on the 13th of Adar as the day we're going to destroy all the Jews, and the letters were sent out instructing the governors to do so. By the way, the month of Adar, it's going to be end of February, maybe middle of March. It changes every year because the Jewish calendar is not exactly tied to ours. But just so you know roughly when this is. And the Jews do celebrate Purim, in February or March. I think in this year, 2022, it's going to be in March. Verse 14, a copy of the edict to be issued as law in every province was published to all the peoples so that they should be ready for this day. The couriers went out impelled by the king's command while the decree was issued at the citadel in Susa, and while the king and Haman sat down to drink, the city of Susa was in confusion. Yeah, I can see that. This edict goes out to kill all these people. What's happening? Chapter 4. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and wailed loudly and bitterly. He went as far as the king's gate, for no one was to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. There in this verse, we have the verse here, right? It does have El Shaddai every 7 letters apart. So here's another place where God's name is hidden, El Shaddai. El, Elohim, Shaddai is Almighty. And it's every 7 letters apart. Very clever, because God's perfection, completion number is 7. Verse 3, in each and every province where the command and decree of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many lay on sackcloth and ashes. Then Esther's maidens and her eunuchs came and told her, and the queen writhed in great anguish. And she sent garments to clothe Mordecai, that he might remove his sackcloth from him, but he did not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach from the king's eunuchs, whom the king had appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. So Hathach went out to Mordecai to the city square in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict, which had been issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show Esther and inform her, and to order her to go into the king to implore his favor and to plead with him for her people. Hathach returned and related Mordecai's words to Esther. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and ordered him to reply to Mordecai, all the king's servants and people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king to the inner court who is not summoned, he has but one law, that he be put to death, unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter, so that he may live. And I have not been summoned to the king for these 30 days. They related Esther's words to Mordecai. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. So, what's happening here? Mordecai lets Esther know what's happening and says, Esther, you've got to save us. You need to go before the king and plead our case. Esther said, I can't do that, because the rule is anybody who shows up to the king without being summoned will be put to death, unless the king holds out his golden scepter to that person. But what if he doesn't? Then I'm a dead woman. This is Esther's thinking. You got it? So Esther here, she has some trepidation about going in. She's not, Mordecai, he's 100%. I'm not bowing down to no Haman. I'm not bowing. He's being true to God, Mordecai. He's not afraid. Esther here has a little fear, right? I don't know. I can't go before the king. If I go without being summoned, I could be killed. So I'm just letting you know. I know the book is called Esther, but I think Mordecai is the really big hero here of all. Okay. Verse 14. For if you remain silent at this time, this is Mordecai speaking, for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. Wow, that's powerful. That's very powerful. Mordecai is saying, listen, Esther, if you don't want to go do it, whatever. He doesn't mention God here, but it's from God. Relief and deliverance will arise from someplace else. Either you go in before the king and plead our case, or it'll happen another way, but it's going to happen. And if you don't do it, you and your family might get wiped out. Okay, but deliverance will come from somewhere. God is going to be faithful to we Jews. That's what I'm seeing in this verse. Verse 15. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go, assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens also will fast in the same way. And thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and did just as Esther had commanded him. Okay, so Esther's coming around here now. Okay, all right, I'll go, and if I perish, I perish. That's nice. And I like that verse 14 also, that for such a time as this. We hear that how many women's studies, how many men's studies we talk about. It's titled, "For Such a Time as This," right? But remember, Esther at first had she was a little squeamish about going. But she came around and she finally decided, if I go, I go. If I perish, I perish. All right. This kind of reminds me of life. Because sometimes we get into these positions where there's just no way out that we can see, right? We're in no position to do anything to solve the problem. The only thing we have to do is maybe pray, not maybe, all we have to do is pray and trust God, okay? So this is one of those times right here. Mordecai, he believed that if Esther refused to be the person by whom deliverance comes, it'll come from somewhere else. But we just have to have faith that God will be faithful. Very nice. Okay. Chapter 5. Now it came about on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace in front of the king's rooms. And the king was sitting on his royal throne in the throne room opposite the entrance of the palace. When the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, she obtained favor in his sight. And the king extended to Esther the golden scepter which was in his hand. So Esther came near and touched the top of the scepter. Then the king said to her, "What is troubling you, Queen Esther? And what is your request? Even to half of the kingdom it shall be given to you." Esther said, "If it pleases the king, may the king and Haman come this day to the banquet that I have prepared for him." In this verse 4, we have another instance of God's name being hidden. Notice we have four words. The first line there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 7th word begins with a yod. Then the next word is a hey. The next word is a vav. The next word begins with a hey. You have yud hey vav hey appearing forwards, beginning 4 consecutive words. That's nice. God's name's hidden. Remember we saw it before. It was hidden backwards, right? Yud hey vav hey. And she's requested he comes to a banquet that they have prepared. Then the king said, "Bring Haman quickly, that we may do as Esther desires." So the king and Haman came to the banquet which Esther had prepared. By the way, here's another banquet. How many banquets have we had so far? As they drank their wine at the banquet, the king said to Esther, "What is your petition? For it shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to half of the kingdom it shall be done." So Esther replied, "My petition and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and it pleases the king to grant my petition and do what I request, may the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king says." Okay. Her request is, she went before the king. He held out the scepter. She put her hand on it. "What is your request?" "I'll give you up to half of my kingdom, Esther. What do you want?" "I want you and Haman to come to a banquet I have prepared today." So the king and Haman go to the banquet. "Okay, Esther, I'm here. What is your petition? Up to half of the kingdom. What do you want?" "Yes, I'd like you to come to a banquet I have prepared for you tomorrow." That's what it says. Look, 5:4. "If it pleases the king, may the king and Haman come this day to the banquet that I have prepared for him." Then the king and Haman go to a banquet. Then in 5:7, 5:8, they actually go to the banquet and says, what is your request, Esther? And she says, may the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them tomorrow. Then the king and the Haman go to a banquet. My request is you come to a banquet. They go to the banquet, and okay, what is your request? You come to another banquet tomorrow. How many banquets have we had so far in this story? And now we got 2 in a row that actually don't make much sense, right? Why didn't she just ask what she wanted to ask? Why did she ask him to a banquet in order to ask him to a banquet? All right, this one might play out by the end of the story. By the way, this is going to be a 2-part video, so that's going to come out in part 2. Hopefully this will bring you back. Esther 5:9. Then Haman went out that day glad and pleased of heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand up or tremble before him, Haman was filled with anger against Mordecai. Haman controlled himself, however, went to his house, and sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh. Then Haman recounted to them the glory of his riches, and the number of his sons, and every instance where the king had magnified him, and how he had promoted him above the princes and servants of the king. Haman also said, even Esther the queen, let no one but me come with the king to the banquet which she had prepared, and tomorrow also I am invited by her with the king. Yet all of this does not satisfy me every time I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. So he's got everything. He got the king's signet ring. He's been invited by the queen to a banquet and to another banquet. He's number 2 in all of Persia. And what's got him all worried is this one Jew who won't bow down to him. Isn't it? We get these in our own brain, don't we? We're hung up on one stupid little thing. And it's our downfall. Okay, what did Emerson say? Foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. There's one right here. Okay. By the way, Esther 5:13, here it is in the Hebrew. Notice again, we have 4 words that end with a yud, a hey, and a vav, and a hey. So here we have yud, hey, vav, hey appears backwards, ending 4 consecutive words. So here Yahweh's name again appears hidden in the book of Esther, and it's different than the other 2 that we've seen already. This is the 3rd instance of Yahweh's name being hidden. Verse 14 of Esther 5, then Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends said to him, have a gallows 50 cubits high made, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go joyfully with the king to the banquet. And the advice pleased Haman, so he had a gallows made. Chapter 6. So you see what's happening so far? Haman thinks he's got it going. The king likes him. The queen likes him. All's well. He's cast lots. He's picked a day. The king's agreed. Kill all the Jews. Everything's great, except for this one guy who won't bow down to him. His wife says, you know what? Have a gallows built 50 cubits high, and in the morning hang Haman and be done with him. And Haman is feeling good. And I'm feeling good too. And I think we need to put an end to this video because it's getting long and we need a part 2. And in chapter 6, we have the turning point in the story. So I invite you to tune back in to part 2 to find out how this is going to all unravel. So until then, to God be the glory, to God be the honor, to God be the praise. Thank you for watching. We will see you back here soon. God bless. Bye-bye. Wait! We have a bonus. Okay, this whole story of Mordecai, the good guy, and Haman, the bad guy, it actually begins way back in the Torah. Okay? If you go back to Genesis 14:7, we meet a guy named Amalek. You've heard of the Amalekites, right? This is Amalek. Verse 7 says, then they turned back and came to En Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and attacked all the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites who dwelt in Hazazon Tamar. This, by the way, my friends, is the first mention of Amalek. And how does he apply to this Esther and Haman hundreds of years, 1,000 years in the future? Maybe thousands. Okay. The story of Esther actually starts with Esau and Jacob. Okay. I showed you the first mention of Amalek. The second mention of Amalek is in Genesis 36:12. And Timnah was concubine to Eliphaz, Esau's son, and she bare Eliphaz Amalek. These were the sons of Adah, Esau's wife. Okay, who was Eliphaz? Eliphaz, you remember Jacob and Esau, right? Jacob got the blessing. Jacob sold the stew. He put the hair on his arm and got the blessing from his father. And Esau was really angry. Okay. Well, Esau eventually married and had his own kids. It says, and Timnah was concubine to Eliphaz, Esau's son. And she bare to Eliphaz Amalek. So Amalek, who's he? He's going to be Esau's grandson. And I can see if you grew up in this house, Esau is always going to be complaining to his kids and to his grandkids, you're my brother Jacob. He screwed me out of a birthright. He screwed me out of a blessing from the father. Jacob, Jacob this, Jacob that. Always bad-mouthing Jacob. You can just picture it, right? So those kids are going to grow up hating Jacob. Good. Okay. So, who's Amalek? Amalek is Esau had a son named Eliphaz. Eliphaz had a concubine, not a wife, and she bore a son named Amalek. This is the grandson of Esau, and he's got a head full of, I don't like Jacob, I don't like Jacob, Jacob bad, and Jacob's descendants bad. So there is this battle in their brains that they don't like Jacob. I showed you the first mention of Amalek, by the way, was back in Genesis 14:7. The second mention of Amalek was this one in Genesis 36:12. This is pretty cool here. If you start with the first mention of Amalek, take the Ayin, because Amalek's name is Ayin Mem Lamed Kuf. Start at the first mention, the first Ayin of Amalek, and count the number of letters until you get to the final Kuf of the second mention of Amalek. There are 12,110 letters from Amalek to Amalek. Okay, what do you do with that? Well, the book of Esther contains 12,110 letters. Okay, might be a coincidence, although I've told you 100 times there's no biblical Hebrew word for coincidence. God didn't need such a word. Okay, but that is true what we're seeing here. Okay, so maybe there's a tie-in between Esther and Amalek. All right. And Amalek, if you remember, in Exodus 17, verse 8, then Amalek came and fought with Israel in Rephidim. And Moses said unto Joshua, choose us out men and go fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. And Joshua did as Moses had said to him, and they fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And it came to pass, when Moses held up his hand, that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. Remember this? And they actually had, Moses sat on a rock, and it said, and Aaron and Hur held up Moses' hand, and as long as his hand was in the air, Israel was winning. Verse 12 of Exodus 17, but Moses' hands were heavy, and they took a stone and put under him, and he sat on it, and Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side and one on the other. Thus his hands were steady until the sun set. That word is not steady. The word is amunah. Amunah, it comes where we get the word amen, aman, amanah. It means faithful. His hands were faithful, holding that rod up, and Israel would prevail. And Joshua discomfited Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. So there we have an early mention of Amalek. What else? Let's jump ahead a bit. In Numbers 24:2, and when he looked on Amalek, he took up his parable and said, Amalek was the first of the nations, but his latter end shall be that he perish forever. So this Amalek, bad guy, he's going to be doomed, right, at the end. Deuteronomy 25:17. Remember what Amalek did to you, by the way, when you were coming out of Egypt? Therefore, it shall be when the Lord your God has given you rest from all your enemies around about in the land which the Lord your God is giving you to possess as an inheritance, that you shall blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. You shall not forget it. Remember that? Okay. So we're supposed to blot out Amalek's name. It's going to be forever gone. You shall blot out the remembrance of it, of Amalek from under heaven. Look at 1 Samuel 15. Thus the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how he laid wait for him in the way when he came up out of Egypt. Now go and smite Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. And Saul came to a city of Amalek and lay in wait in the valley. So Saul, remember the Jews wanted a king. We want a king. Everybody has a king. Give us a king. God said, you don't need a king. You've got me. No, we want a king. We want a king. So God gave them Saul. Big, tall, strapping, good looking, lots of hair. Good, kingly looking guy. But he didn't always follow what God instructed, right? And God instructed him, go fight the Amalekites, the descendants of Amalek, and kill every one of them. Man, woman, child, animal, everything. And so he goes and he attacks and he kills a lot. Look at 1 Samuel 15:20. This is when Saul, it's after the battle, and Samuel shows up. Samuel's the prophet. And Saul said unto Samuel, yeah, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord, and have gone the way which the Yahweh sent me, and have brought Agag, the king of Amalek, and have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. So, the battle's over. Samuel shows up, and Saul is kind of bragging, I did what God said. I went and I killed all the Amalekites, and here's Agag, the king of Amalek. Well, he obviously didn't kill all the Amalekites. If here's Agag, the king, right? He spared the king of the Amalekites. And a little after that, Samuel hears all this noise. And he goes, what's that bleating I hear in my ears? And Saul said, oh yeah, well those are the animals of the Amalekites. Well, I thought you were supposed to destroy them all. Well, we brought them so we could sacrifice them to the Lord. That's not what the Lord said. The Lord said, kill them all. Animals, every sheep and cow and ass, right? They were supposed to kill them all, and he didn't. And Samuel was upset about this. And in 1 Samuel 28:15, it says, because you obeyed not the voice of the Lord, nor executed his fierce wrath upon Amalek, therefore Yahweh has done this thing unto you this day. And he stripped the kingship off of Saul. Saul would no longer be king because he's disobeying the instructions he was given, right? he spared Agag, and he spared all these animals. Okay, so look in Esther chapter 3, how it began. Verse 1, after these events, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and established his authority over all the princes who were with him. You notice that Haman is a descendant of Agag. He's an Agagite. If King Saul would have obeyed God and killed every single Amalekite, including Agag, there would not be any Agagites to produce Haman in the future. Amalek, by the way, is also a spirit of Antichrist. It's the raspberry seed in Israel's wisdom tooth, right? It's always there. There's always a problem. You can't get it up. That's Amalek. And Amalek's supposed to be never mentioned again. May he be completely forgotten and no remembrance of him. But King Saul, he let Agag live, and in that time Agag had child, or had sex with somebody to have a child, and his line continued, which then produced Haman, an Agagite. You see, disobedience to God produces problems in the future. We see that right here. 1 Samuel 15:20, and Saul said unto Samuel, yes, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord, and have gone the way which Yahweh sent me. And I brought Agag, the king of Amalek, and have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. Yeah, he brought Agag. All right. Now, let's look at 2 Samuel 16. There was a guy named Shimei. Anybody remember Shimei, what he did? He's a Jewish guy. Verse 5. Now when King David came to Bahurim, there was a man from the family of the house of Saul, whose name of Shimei, the son of Gera, coming from there. And he came out cursing continuously as he came. And he threw stones at David and at all the servants of King David. And all the people and all the mighty men were on his right and his left. Also Shimei said thus when he cursed, come out, you bloodthirsty man, you rogue. Remember, King David, remember the incident he had with Bathsheba, right? He looks across and sees this beautiful woman who's married, and so he finds out that the husband is out fighting the war, the battle, so he calls for the husband to come, and he says, give me an update on the battle, and he gives him an update, and he says, okay, great, why don't you take a few days off, and the guy doesn't want to take a few days off, and because David had slept with Bathsheba, right? And he has to account for Bathsheba's pregnancy. So he brings her husband home, tells him, go spend a couple of days with your wife, and then go back to the battle. And Uriah the Hittite, that's the wife or the husband, says, no, I don't want to have a few days off if all of my men can't have a few days off, so I'm going to go back to the battle now. So David's got a problem. Bathsheba's pregnant, and there's no reason for her to be pregnant because the husband is at battle. He didn't impregnate her. Remember this story? So David has some baggage in his past, and he's not squeaky clean. He ends up sending the husband to the front lines to get killed, right? And then David can then legitimately marry her and sleep with her and account for this pregnancy. So he's got some ugly stuff in the past, and Shimei knows it. Shimei, he's a Benjamite, right? Shimei, it said. So Shimei is not a fan of David, and he's cursing him, and he's throwing rocks at him and his mighty men. Remember this? Okay, it says, we just said it in 2 Samuel 16. Verse 8 of 2 Samuel 16. The Lord has brought upon you all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. And the Lord has delivered the kingdom into the hand of Absalom your son. So now you are caught in your own evil, because you are a bloodthirsty man. Then Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said to the king, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Please let me go over and take off his head. But the king said, What have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? So let him curse, because the Lord has said to him, curse David. Who then shall say, why have you done so? So Shimei is cursing David because David's not the squeakiest clean history. And Shimei's cursing him and throwing stones at him. And David's men says, listen, he shouldn't be throwing stones at you, King David. Let us go take off his head. And David said, no, maybe the Lord told him to curse David. So David showed mercy to Shimei, the man who was cursing him and throwing rocks at him. Shimei the Benjamite. 2 Samuel 2, 16, 11. And David said to Abishai, to all his servants, see how my son who came from my own body seeks my life. How much more now may this Benjamite? Let him alone and let him curse, for so the Lord has ordered him. It may be that the Lord may look on my affliction, and that the Lord will repay me with good for his cursing this day. David is showing mercy on Shimei the Benjamite and saying, maybe the Lord wants him to curse me, but maybe the Lord will repay with good whatever cursing this Shimei the Benjamite is doing. Okay, well, look at Esther 2:5. When we're introduced to Mordecai, it says, now there was, oh, and by the way, this is one that we all read together. So if you're watching along, let's read it together. Esther 2:5. Now there was at the citadel in Susa a Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Yair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. And when it says has these three names, Yair, Shimei, Kish, that doesn't mean there was just 4 generations between between Mordecai and Shimei. Just because they named a few, there's a lot of other fathers and generations that may not be mentioned. They're naming the big ones here, okay? There's probably a lot more there's a lot more generations between these two, okay? But notice Mordecai is a descendant of Shimei the Benjamite. Do you realize the significance of that? If David would have said, yes, go take off that dog's head for cursing me, Shimei would not be. And that means Shimei's son would not be, and Shimei's son's son, and Shimei's great-great-great-great-grandson, Mordecai, would not be. There would be no Mordecai, a hero in the Esther story, if David would have had Shimei's head removed. So now we're going to look at both of these examples. If, because of Saul's disobedience, Agag lived, and Agag had children who produced Haman, the antagonist in the Esther story. And David showed mercy to Shimei, and because of that mercy, Shimei had descendants and descendants and descendants, which produced Mordecai, who was the hero of the Esther story and ended up saving the Jews. Beautiful, beautiful picture. You got it? Saul's disobedience led to Haman. David's mercy led to Mordecai. All right, there's your bonus. Thanks for watching. God bless. Bye-bye.